Ladies and gentlemen, let's get ready for the Wot Supp podcast. With your host, Stu OG Industry Shannon and Will Warren Davey, new school formulator extraordinaire. We're talking all things supplements with insiders, athletes, experts, and more. So sit back, relax, and prepare to find out what's up.
Okay, guys, welcome back to the Wot Supp podcast. Today we are interviewing Lucas from Ergogenic Health. He's the founder of this page, which is a wealth of information around hormonal optimization and indeed optimization in a lot of the supplemental space and the science behind that. And we've always found with this podcast, this little project we've been doing with none other than legendary Stu Shannon as well, my co-host this morning. Say howdy, Stu.
G'day guys. I'm really excited about this one. It's, we get to talk to a lot of different people on this podcast, from brand owners to business people and stuff like that. But it's, it's not that often we get to chat to someone who, is on a whole nother level to even where Will and I are at. Hopefully throughout this episode, you'll get a bit of an understanding that that's kind of what we brought Lucas in for, a whole new perspective and really some interesting insight into this stuff.
Beautiful.
So awesome, guys. Yeah, well, I just wanted to say massive hats off to you guys for starting the podcast. I tuned in about a month ago, reached out to Will and said just how much I really enjoy the way that you guys conduct your podcast. And I had a look at some of the guests that you brought on. And, as soon as you brought on Gorilla Chemist, I'm like, right, I have to reach out because we bounce ideas a lot. Like I'm always messaging like him in his Insta DMs and just bouncing ideas. I'm sharing novel ingredients. Eventually, like reshared one of my research papers that I sent through, and then just ever since then, guys, like I've just been like really I've been very passionate about researching nootropics, supplements, and compounds for over 7 years now, and experimenting with a ton of wacky things that I'm sure like some of these guys would have never heard of.
Yeah. What's your, before we get like really deep into the specifics of the supplements and that sort of thing, what is your background, Lucas? Like where do you come from? What's your, what does your history look like?
Yeah. So, I was playing sort of professional soccer for many years and was always interested in sort of sports performance and athletic performance. After high school, I enrolled into exercise science and business, so like a double degree. I did about a year of that and was loving it and was doing really well. But I spent literally instead of doing my assignments, like majority of my time was spent researching like this sort of stuff, nootropics, supplements and things like that. I then got involved in a startup here in Melbourne, which I had the honor of formulating like our very own nootropic supplement. I would actually consider that to be one of the very first. In fact, I was the very first to use cream in Australia back in the day, because when I found that ingredient, I was like, right, that's a winner. And then just sort of from there, like I then enrolled into my naturopathy degree. So I'm in my final trimester right now. Almost finished my 4-year naturopathy degree. And yeah, sort of just been researching along the side. My dad's a pharmacist, so I've sort of got that. And bouncing, I'm sort of smack in the middle.
It's in your genes, so to speak.
Yeah,
that's a really interesting space to occupy too, because that's where I think is your most effective for holistic treatments with people. Because I find there's a lot of really great things using adaptogens. Stu and I are massive fans of using a lot of your botanicals that we lend from the naturopathy space and the Ayurvedic medicine space, but also then blending that with a lot of your amino acids and sort of pharmaceuticals that we'll use to elicit a given response as well. So it's really cool to see someone else formulating in that space where it's a blend of both. It's sort of like sort of naturopathy meets sports science almost would be where I'd put it. That's really awesome to see, because you get really great results when you get the holistic botanical adaptogens base formulating, and then you also throw in, like you said, if your parents are pharmacists, going in from the background and throwing in the amino acids and other things to help elicit response, you get a really potent sort of synergy
Exactly.
a lot of the time. So that's really cool to see, mate. Like that's going to lead into some awesome content for us. So
yeah. Something that kind of strikes me as interesting, Lucas, is I've been in the supplement game for a while. I started out in 2009 in the supplement game, and in 2009 no one was talking about nootropics, right? No, at least not in the supplement world. it might have been discussed a little bit in, I guess, in the medicine world where you're looking at things like, treatment of like ADD and ADHD and these sort of things. But no one was really talking about nootropics. And then, like, for me, the explosion happened when the movie Limitless was released. And for the first time, I guess, the spotlight was shone on these compounds, nootropics, and people went, "Oh, wouldn't it be cool if these things that were shown in the movie, which obviously was heavily exaggerated, wouldn't it be cool if these things exist?" And then kind of, people started going, yeah, actually they do exist. And in fact, that movie was based around a nootropic called modafinil, which is a pharmaceutical nootropic. So is that where the explosion of nootropics happened in your mind, or was it before that, or what caused this?
Yeah, it's funny. It's funny you mentioned that, because back in the, if you have a look at the Google Analytics for when nootropics started peaking, it was literally at the time that movie Limitless was released. But even, I think, honestly, like a couple of years before that, funnily enough, I'll give you a bit of a story as to like how I actually started experimenting with nootropics. So back in like year 11, I was like sort of researching things that could help me with studying and like, memory retrieval and consolidation, things like that. And I actually came across now looking back at it, it's quite funny, but it was a product called Think Gum.
They're on point. Their marketing, but
who's the marketing team behind that name? What should we call it? Well, it's a gum that helps you think. Thanks, gum.
Yeah, and then sort of just started experimenting with that, and I was looking into like some of the ingredients. Like it had bacopa, like vinpocetine, a couple of like decent ingredients. It had the rosemary for that. That's like a sense-based memory retrieval aspect. So I think that I found it did help. I had a few side effects in terms of like lightheadedness and things like that. But anyway, that sort of, I then started experimenting with like acetyl L-carnitine. That sort of was the first introductory. That was like more for like, because I was playing soccer at the time, I was interested in things that could help with like, like explosive power, just in terms of like reaction time, things like that. And I noticed that L-car was quite good for me in that regard. And then, sort of combine that with one of my favorite like adaptogens. And I think you could consider me like someone who abused this adaptogen, because I literally used it for about 3 years straight. Cordyceps mushroom.
Beautiful. Beautiful. Yeah.
And yeah. And so I honestly think it was really good for like my lung capacity and my breathing potential. I always had like very good like aerobic. I had a really good extended anaerobic threshold. So like for like 200-meter events, I was always good at that, maintaining that pace. But anyway, then sort of just fell in love with like understanding the brain, like starting to really hone in on how can I hack my personality? How can I hack my physiology to accompany the situation? It's like, if I'm going to go to a party, right, what can I take to be socially flexible, like less tense, like outgoing, a bit of a comedian, a bit of a smart ass, like just not, you know what I mean?
This is 100%. I kind of found myself in the same space a few years back, and because I suffer from social anxiety a lot, and a lot of people wouldn't know it to talk to me now and to see all the things that I do with my businesses, with this podcast, for example. But I turned to beta blockers, and beta blockers for me were a life changer. I could take beta blockers and put myself in any situation and know that my brain would fire the way that I wanted it to without being crippled by anxiety. So, I would take beta blockers before I would go and give a talk, or before I would, for example, go to a party or go out on a date with a girl. And I was abusing beta blockers at one point there because, in all honesty, it improved the way that I could present myself. I was able to present myself in the way that I really wanted to without being crippled by anxiety and other factors that were, I guess, freezing me up and holding me in a box.
And this is a common theme actually that I've just picked up on across there, and it's really quite I think fascinating when you said, because we've had some life coaches on previously, and I think, and mindset coaches, and I find in this space, in the fitness space, that's a really big part of it as well. Discipline and mindset coaching is a really big part of what a lot of people do in our space. And I guess a lot of them, I always like to do the debate, what comes first? You know, do you have to have the neurochemistry to support the positive mood, or does the positive mood support the chemistry? It's a bit of a chicken and the egg scenario, right? And I love that both of you have basically gone out on your own and gone, well, you've sort of forced the chicken. You've gone, okay, well, we've got situations here, we've had anxiety, or we're in a social setting, we're not quite comfortable. What things are going to promote dopamine or serotonin or acetylcholine, or, you know, endorphins, or things that are going to help with promoting, you know, basically having us on point in that particular situation. That's pretty much the definition of biohacking for this, which is exactly what today is about. So what a great intro.
Well,
this is awesome.
I don't know where the penny dropped for you, Lucas, but for me, the real penny dropped when I realized that when I was drunk, that people really appreciated my humor, my personality, and I was doing a lot better in social situations when I was drunk, other than the fact that I was sloppy and I would say things I didn't intend to say, or I would vomit or make a fool of myself. And it was like, how can I induce this kind of personality without being intoxicated to a point where I'm saying things that I don't intend to say? And for me, the answer was beta blockers. And then fast forward a little bit into the future of that, nootropics.
Yeah, it's funny. It's funny how you said like that feeling of you're so disinhibited. So like you got to be careful with what comes out of your mouth. Sometimes, like for example, I've formulated a stack, and honestly, I can't even recognize myself talking sometimes. Like some of the things that would come out of my mouth, and some of the bizarre connections that I'd make between concepts, it would just make no sense, but it's freaking hilarious. Like
I think that's particularly the case with, because some people have started, it's gotten quite trendy now to formulate things like lion's mane and cordyceps and reishi and turkey's tail and all that sort of jazz, and which is really awesome to see, because they're phenomenally you know, versatile, I suppose you'd say, as a natural compound. But I think, like you said, in terms of felt effects being sometimes not quite what you'd expect, I think they're a lot of the times they're like that. Like some big brands in recent times have brought out some absolutely loaded nootropic formulas, like with really heavy in lion's mane in particular, and they're not quite ready for the feeling that it's not similar to other nootropics in the felt effects a lot of the time that you're used to. Like it's not always as straightforward with nootropics as being just a dopamine agonist or something that'll boost acetylcholine. Like, you know, when you're just playing with something as simple as an amino acid like tyrosine, you can rely on just a quick dopamine hit, beautiful, easy, no problem. Vitex, very strong dopamine hit. You know, but when you start playing with some other compounds and throwing them together, it's really quite tricky to manage the synergies. And that's something that Stu and I have always, you know, sort of spoken about with some guests, is, you know, how to actually make them work together and get a best result. So I guess a really great way to start a little bit of a shallow deep dive on these would be, you know, some of the things that have worked well in your time and things that haven't. You know, what are some good compounds? What are some bad that you started formulating with in recent times?
Geez, where do we start in terms of my experiments? All right, so I might actually start with something that's really fresh at the moment that I played around with a couple of days ago, and this goes back to the principle of get bad to get good, as in like this is a completely different concept in terms of like, yes, you can take an L-car, a tyrosine, a thing that will get you up. You'll get up, you'll be up above baseline, like 40%, 50% above baseline. And it's a steady, gradual decline back to your normal state. Like, whereas this is self-induced. So instead, I go down 30%, but to come back up about 60, 70%, but maintain that. Now, I know it sounds bizarre and weird, but it's sort of like a snapback effect. And there's been a plethora of compounds that have achieved this for me. But we'll talk about one right now that's fresh in my mind. And that's an adaptogen from South America. It's very well known in the Amazonian jungles. You've probably heard of it, Will. It's called Neurocram.
Is that's in a it's not legal to formulate with here unless it's in a particular form, isn't it? Because it was it around very, like, it got some attention very early on with like the phenylpyridines and stuff, and the subutamine era, I think, didn't it? It's a traditionally used herb, isn't it?
You'd be surprised. You can actually get it through like Optimal RX and a few of the like MediHerb, I think, may even formulate a
Cool.
Muropalma, but it's you can use it fine. It was actually one of the ingredients in my Brain X product, which never got to market. But anyway, we'll talk about Muropalma. So yes, so this is basically, we know that Muropalma is a GABA A antagonist. So you're going to be blocking that receptor. You're going to be literally causing anxiety. I was around here, like, just, a couple of days back, and just I megadosed. I had quite a lot because I haven't had it in a long time, and I'm like, I needed to remind myself on like what it was doing, how it affects me. And that's the other thing. I always revisit compounds. Like, I'll assess them and then revisit them 6 months later or whatever. But with Muropalma, so that, yes, it caused a GABA A antagonist, so suppresses GABA A receptors, which means that you're going to feel the anxiety, you're going to feel more tense, but you will feel more stimulated and aware and alert. So it's a bit of a trade-off, but the whole point of that was to reset my tolerance to taurine, because I love my taurine. So, and we know that taurine's a GABA A agonist. So the theories, and again, this is all based on rodent studies, but because it's a GABA A antagonist, you're going to get that rebound upregulation of GABA A receptors, so that when you introduce the taurine, you get that sensitivity back to the taurine, which I'm definitely feeling like today for sure.
Okay, got you. So by basically forcing a low, then you're, I guess the feedback loop will be saying GABA levels are quite low. Let's auto-regulate, boost that back up. When you introduce an agonist, it's even higher. You get an exaggerated GABA response, which I'm assuming great mood, feeling of well-being, calmness. Brilliant. Okay.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
Yeah, very clever.
Taurine is actually, in my opinion, probably the most underrated supplement in this space of any supplement, and I think probably the most confused supplement. It's actually, I've got 500 milligrams of it in my Cortidrone, which is my anti-cortisol or I guess my stress relief product. And taurine was really what I based the whole product around. And I feel like some people don't even know that taurine is a relaxant, not a stimulant. Because they've seen it in Red Bull, people go, oh, dude, it's got a heap of taurine in it. And you're like, man, that's not the purpose of taurine in Red Bull. The reason that they included taurine in the first place was to try and reduce the jittery kind of, as you said, anxious, wired feeling that you are getting from these huge dumps of caffeine and other stimulants. So the taurine is actually designed to offset that and is a powerful relaxant, really effective.
So versatile amino acid too. Like, it works on even works on bile production as well. Like, it does so many things that the more I look into taurine, the more I'm impressed. For an incredibly inexpensive, multifaceted sort of amino acid, taurine's really, really cool stuff. I didn't know, actually, until you started mentioning it, Stu, and you were formulating with it, particularly as a calmative for its effects on the adrenergic receptors. I was like, wow, this has actually got some merit to it. When I started reading, it does so many different areas: smooth muscle contraction, bile production, all this stuff. And then when you stack it in with like your alcars and other acetyl donors, it's wicked. So that's a really interesting way of approaching it. It's sort of going towards a nootropic, you're going backwards first to use your own feedback loops to get you forward a few steps. That's really that's clever, man.
Kind of like cruel to be kind almost.
It is.
Let's punish myself a little bit so I get the high afterwards. I mean, but as athletes and bodybuilders, we're very used to this concept of be cruel to yourself for a payoff later, right? Like, let's induce some sort of stress in order to trigger a positive response. And I guess that's what you're coming to with this compound that you're talking about. I just want to rewind a little bit though, because I know some people who listen to this podcast are not necessarily as inept as you guys are with all these things. And I wanted to quickly go back and just define what a nootropic is and what it does at its most basic level. So maybe you could kind of that, Lucas, for those who maybe even are hearing this word nootropic for the first time on this podcast. Like, some people have heard of Alpha Brain and that's their entire knowledge of nootropics.
Sure, yeah. So we'll keep it simple. So, like, nootropics is essentially just a category of either a supplement or a compound or a drug that can improve overall cognition. So that can be executive functioning, memory, focus, alertness, concentration, things like that. So there is a really strict criteria for something to be classified as a nootropic. And that's where the whole, and we'll be very familiar with the whole racetam, the piracetam, oxyracetam, coliracetam, all the other racetams that William Georgia, the guy who, the psychologist who founded Nootropics, he had a strict criteria for something to be classified as nootropic. And I think we'll cover like a couple of them. The first one is that it needs to be non-toxic. The second one needs to be that it's safe. The third one, we'll go through them all. The third one's that it protects the brain against chemical or physical stressors. And then 4 is like helps the brain adapt to a novel environment, or say like hypoxia or things like that. So unfortunately, compounds like modafinil, although it does exert nootropic-like effects, which it certainly does help with that wakefulness and, the alertness, focus, drive, whatever.
Technically by definition, not a nootropic, right?
Technically, no. I mean, if you look at, I've got my PubMed notifications on every day for modafinil, so I'm keeping an eye out for what's the latest. But in terms of whether it brings you down below baseline, man, I've heard that too many times. You take modafinil, you're really borrowing from the future. Like,
it's very much like Noopept as well. Unfortunately, beautiful compound, and I think like you said, the initial professor who sort of discovered this, a psychologist, and named the nootropics as meaning forward mind, and I think, like you said, robbing from your future self in a sense. When you're using some of these things, some nootropics support a particular process. They might support your dopamine system, they might support your serotonin system, or prevent breakdown of those neurochemicals. Other ones, unfortunately, burn through them at a greater rate. They're sort of an accelerator of what rate you can use these for. So Noopept, modafinil, while they're fantastic for a short-term productivity boost, you do eventually feel like a potato about 3 hours later when it eventually winds you back down. So that was a great overview, Lucas, for our listeners who might not be across it. We're very fortunate now. We've cultivated a bit of a listening base of supplement store owners, supplement enthusiasts, fitness enthusiasts, athletes. So we'd like to think they've got it. A lot of them will have a decent.
The majority will have a grasp of this stuff, but I like to speak for the guys who are maybe just coming into this or just listening to a podcast because they're excited about supplements, which was me once upon a time. So something I wanted to ask you, Lucas, because, I guess you're kind of one of the masters of this space. And it's something that I guess has a question that's interested me for a while, and I haven't been able to really get a clear, definitive answer on. Now, we know that nootropics work in a number of different ways, whether that be to manipulate the chemicals present in the brain, or whether it be to speed up the rate of signaling in the brain, or whatever it might be. We also understand when we study the brain that there's this concept of neuroplasticity. So if we, if we do something repetitively enough and we force the brain to do something enough, could the brain potentially, react in a way that it's reacting to these nootropics without them if we use them for long enough? Are we creating positive long-term effects on the brain by taking nootropics?
That's such a good point, Stu. I was actually thinking about that last week in terms of like the reinforcing effects of these substances. You can literally use them to create healthy habits. And that's a good example. Like, let's say something that directly improves motivation to train, or a willingness to train, or let's say somebody's in the pits and they've got no desire to get out of bed. They've got nothing. They don't have any drive or whatever, and they need to create those healthy habits and behaviors. Well, first of all, it's highly likely that person has got very depleted dopamine or just dysfunctional signaling in the brain. So yeah, you can definitely use things that will get that person up, create the healthy habits. And then once the compounds leave the system, part of that neuroplasticity, as you said, would remain. And I guess because it's become a reinforcing habit, you're going to get that natural dopamine spike from that behavior again, because it's part of the reason why addiction, like as in terms of addiction, one of the biggest regulators of addiction is the behavioral component of it. As in, like, for example, with nicotine, one of the reasons why it's so reinforcing is literally the fact that they're picking up the cigarette, and it's that behavioral action of moving the arm. But if you use it as a patch, if you cut the patches up and use it as a patch, which I've used in the past, it doesn't become reinforcing or addictive, because you're literally, it's a slow, steady state release of nicotine, and not all the other shit that you find in cigarettes as well. So,
and which is in itself a useful nootropic, nicotinic acid. So in really, really phenomenal space is, I think, lifestyle hacking, using these things. Like you said, you can, and that's where a lot of our supplements are finally starting to learn. A lot of pre-workout supplements, particularly, are starting to feature those. When I made a non-stimulant pre, but I still wanted people to have perceived cognitive benefits, but those feelings of reward, focus, mood, real laser dialed in tunnel vision, I still wanted them to have that in the absence of stimulants. And so, and we're seeing that in a lot of pre-workouts now, which is great. I'm not sure everyone is across how to dose these things yet. We're still seeing some things that are up and down in what they should be in, but as a whole, that space is really fascinating, where you said you can actually promote positive reward. It's a really, really fascinating little, it's very Pavlovian, really, isn't it? But with, I guess, these sort of compounds that you're playing with lately, let's look down dopamine. But I think where Stu said first, can these things create their own, can it nurture an environment later on? So if you're regularly supplementing with dopamine agonists, with acetylcholine donors and so on, does this foster, as someone who's been in the research more, does this foster long-term higher levels on average of dopamine and acetylcholine, or does this work the opposite way? Does this accelerate our COMT, which might clear dopamine faster, or what's your experience? Because Stu and I don't have a great deal of access to a lot of the time. There's a lot of the research you'd probably be doing in your academics. So what have you found, mate? Do they long-term benefit, or long-term, might cause some mishaps?
Yeah, so it's a good point. So obviously it comes back to the mechanism of action for these compounds. So if we're going to be using something like a very strong dopamine agonist, which again, very difficult to find in nature with, the natural compounds, things like that. There are some, but they're not ridiculous like cabergoline or bromocriptine and things like that. So if we look at that in terms of like the pharmacology aspect, you're not going to get that downregulation response that you get through the adaptogens and the other nootropics like uridine monophosphate, forskolin, a few other compounds like that. Because what's funny is that like we just don't really know what else is present in these herbs that offsets the negative effects when you isolate. So like this was a discussion that I had with Sean Wells like a couple of weeks back about the differences between pulling out the isolate constituent versus the whole package. The whole package is the whole herb, how Mother Nature created it. And this is funny because like I am a naturopath, but I'm still like, I still lean towards isolates every now and then. Like I experiment, then I come back to naturopathy, then I go back to pharmaceutical, then I jump back and forth between them. But really like, it's based around the kick, the sort of the how big do you want the punch to be, and if you want the punch to be huge, then oftentimes there's going to be a trade-off. There'll be a trade-off somewhere downstream.
Yeah, okay, that's an interesting take on it, because you're right. There are certain ones like forskolin which will increase cyclic AMP even in brain cells and so on. A lot of your cordyceps and reishi will increase. But where I'm interested is, and this is something, Stu, you've been very big on, is the longevity space, the anti-aging space, and something I find really fascinating is something like the effects of lion's mane and BDNF and NGF and stuff. So your brain-derived neurotropic factor and other. Yeah, that book I saw you on your story. Actually, Stu's reading Lifespan right now. So another great way that we can probably touch on today when we go more into the hormonal optimization space. But I think where I would answer that question that I asked of myself would be, I would look at things that would probably promote brain-derived neurotropic factor, things that will promote neural growth, neural connectivity. That would foster for me, in a logical sense, long-term better brain function, you would think. So I guess some of the compounds that we when you said, I think this is really important for people, because there are formulators that listen to this as well. People who, people in stores who also are looking at products all day long, and they're the forefront between the research and the actual consumer, which is probably the most crucial part really in getting the exposure to what we're talking about now. talking to those guys directly, when we're saying things that are either a straight isolate to the end form, it's like putting straight choline in versus putting in Alcar plus some, alpha GPC, say, or put it, yeah. Do you find, what are some of your most reliable and reliable sort of synergies of nootropics that you find that people should be looking out for that will elicit a good response with not really any trade-offs for the common, for the common Joe who might want to start trialing these and just look out for something on a label in a pre or just want to buy in a straight form even. But what are some of those ones that the punter who's listened to this podcast gone, okay, these things sound pretty cool. I'd like to start trialing them. What are some of the compounds that you think are reliably effective for most people without any real trade-offs?
Yeah, so we can start as far back into just the singular amino acids. So like you mentioned before, the tyrosine, the taurine, the phenylalanine, and then using the cofactors that help with that synthesis of dopamine. But just in general, from what I've found through like consulting and things like that, is majority of people respond best to substances that will increase dopamine and support GABA and support acetylcholine. They're like the three, and of course there's many others, and we can get into the science of the other ones, but they're like the main ones. So it's important to have some sort of GABAergic that's going to lower that norepinephrine if somebody's too highly strung, they've got too much of the anxiety, but then also providing the cofactors to help with the synthesis of these neurotransmitters. Because keep in mind, if we're going to be jacking up the overall production, there's a good chance we're also going to be depleting iron, copper, vitamin C. Like all of these vitamins and minerals are so important. And in fact, one thing that I'm probably most ashamed about was like about a year ago, I couldn't believe this, but I was donating blood like every 12 weeks. I was taking mega doses of vitamin B1 and curcumin, and also C60 and some other research chemicals. And I couldn't believe it. Got a blood test done, anemic.
Really?
I'm like, right.
Wow.
Yeah, I was like, well, yeah. So my iron levels were low, and I was like, why am I not responding well to stimulants? Why am I not getting that kick again? And then it's like, as soon as I started repleting with iron and stopped donating blood, then
stop losing pints and pints of blood.
I don't know what your thoughts are on this one, Lucas, but I've found it for me with the way that I formulate, especially in the nootropic space. I have a non-stimulant nootropic called Neurocram that I do, which I agonized over the formula for, but I ended up moving away from what the data was telling me and moving towards what I was feeling with what I was making, which was really, it goes against every grain in my body. Is like, I want it to I want the data to support my supplement, so that when people go and look at the data, they can say, well, yes, this works and here's the data to prove it. But when I was trialing some formulations, I was finding that it was diverting a little bit away from what the data was telling me. And I found for me the B vitamins to be crucial synergists in my formulation. So things like B3, B6, B12, and folic acid were like, I guess that was the missing piece in the puzzle for me, was the B vitamins. Have you done much work on or much research into the B vitamins and the synergistic properties with, I guess, other nootropic compounds?
Yeah, for sure. And actually, as you started talking about some of the B vitamins, I just thought back to one that I'm waiting to get a sample of. And you've probably heard of solbutamine and thiamine, but this one is called TTFD, thiamine tetrafolate dihydrochloride, whatever it is, TTFD. Now, if you look at the research on this thiamine derivative, it's got incredible ability to penetrate the blood-brain barrier. And it also, it increased dopamine. They basically said that it had some sort of like, not amphetamine-like property, but it had some sort of like locomotive stimulatory effect. And I was like, this one looks really cool. There was only one company right now synthesizing this derivative of vitamin B1. Because keep in mind, guys, like vitamin B1 was like, I was using that a lot, and that really helped my cognition for a long time. And I was using like 400 to 600 milligrams daily.
Wow.
And I was feeling amazing, like zero anxiety, amazing mental clarity. Just that in terms of getting that wit and that quickness of mind and sharpness, like that was a game changer. Cost me like 2 cents per serve.
Yeah, it's phenomenal stuff like that, the B vitamins, and they're so underrated for how many systems they play in. And when you said in a consulting background as well, when you get someone who's been chronically stressed, i.e. norepinephrine and cortisol are elevated for long periods of time, typically the first things that are gone are the B vitamins, particularly and methylated forms are so handy for them. And along with those other cofactors you spoke about before, the magnesiums, the zincs, the vitamin C's, a lot of these things are often deficient. We burn through them a lot when we're, as we said, particularly if we're doing it purposely and we're biohacking, to try and play with different compounds. I've found that as well. You get to a point where you might be going a little bit heavy on nootropics for a while, and then you just find you've just felt that. It's a weird feeling of, it's almost like when you get CNS fatigue in a powerlifting sense. You're just like, yeah, just a bit flat.
Something just has popped into my head that I'd like to ask. I guess I'd like to throw this to both of you guys because you're both formulators. I've got my own ideas about formulating, and I know that, like, Will, you're very new school with your formulations. I'm very old school. We differ in that way, but there's not to say that one way is better than the other. I guess with new school being the way that we tend to use a few more compounds and we look for a few more pathways than we would with the old school methodology. With old school, we tend to use far less ingredients and try to keep things simplistic. With you, Lucas, I know you've been involved in formulating supplements, but how do you track synergy when you're trying to formulate a supplement? Because for me, personally, I believe that most people shouldn't be formulating. I see people throwing new products onto the market every day, and it really frustrates me. I go, well, who formulated this? And they say, well, I did. And I think to myself, well, what's your background? Sometimes I think, you shouldn't be formulating. Like I've said this before, I feel like there's probably 10 guys in the country who should be formulating and do a good job at it. And the rest, and even big commercial products that I see hitting the market, or products that have become big commercial products, I feel like they've been formulated by someone who just jumped on Google and searched for what are the top 10 most popular nootropics right now and put them all in at their maximum, effective dosage. But how do you track synergy is my question. So for me, I when I'm formulating a product, to be honest, I don't like to use more than about 5 compounds together. I'll start with a key compound, so say, for example, with corticosteroid, that compound was GABA. And then what I'll do is I draw like a map, and I have little, shoots coming off it, and I'll add something in, and then I'll try and predict the impact that's going to have. So I'll say, all right, well, here we have an agonist, here we have another agonist, and then we might have an antagonist coming in later on. Then we might have something that, affects whatever it might be, serotonin. Then we might have something that, and so my map, actually, even with 5 compounds, becomes quite complex when I'm trying to track synergy. Do you do that? Do you track synergy, on paper, or do you just, some people formulate by just putting stuff together and taking it? What's your take on tracking synergy?
Yeah, so I'm pretty similar to you in that regard. I do believe in the principle of minimalism when it comes to formulating, and there should not be any single ingredient in there that does not serve a purpose. There needs to be a strong rationale and strong reason to consider it. Like, you've got your chief ingredient, your deputy, your principal, you've got your minister ingredient. There's variety of ingredients. And so when I do formulate, I do consider synergy by understanding the mechanism of action. So if there's going to be a similar, let's say we've got 2 compounds, we're formulating a sleep supplement. We've got 2 compounds, let's say Guerrilla Chemist's new sleep formula. He's got like a GABA skull cap, and then he's got another hesperidin. He's got a few other things in there. When we look at that, we've got to understand the mechanism of action for each of those ingredients. So if 2 of them are both targeting that GABA A receptor, then there's no need, in my opinion, there is no need to be using a clinical dose. You can get away with a lower dose. You don't need that. Even though the research says, and this is a perfect example of what the research shows you versus how you respond is a completely different ballgame. And I've ran into that issue a million times myself, like in terms of what I've read on paper does not translate to how I feel. So it's like, how can I, it does come back to, I ultimately do believe, yes, you've got the framework, the science, the research, the mechanisms, but it does come back to the individual response, man. Like it does not, like it's all about how the customer feel, how the user feels, right? It's all about, it comes back to that.
That's an interesting one where you said you've got things like, because there are definitely, and I guess for listeners with these compounds that might just be starting to learn what the overall sort of, big 3 or 4 neurotransmitters are that they want to look at. There are, for the listeners, they're definitely stronger agonists. So things that will promote a particularly higher surge in a given neurotransmitter. Let's pick dopamine, for example. You might say tyrosine being a mild to moderate agonist, and then you might use something like Vitex being a very potent agonist. So I think what Lucas is saying, if you were to use both in a formulation, a clinical dose of tyrosine can anywhere be from 500 milligrams up to 2-3 grams even. So you might not use the full 1 to 2 grams if you're also going to use 250 to 500 milligrams of Vitex, which would be an incredibly potent whack of dopamine. So I guess for people formulating and playing with these things, look at the hierarchy on how they're responding.
Do you guys feel like there should be some sort of a prerequisite that you need to be able to formulate supplements? Do you guys feel like the way that it works at the moment, where anyone can have a crack, is wrong?
There's no barrier of entry in this industry, which is why it's very. You gravitate towards the people that, like particularly like when we found Lucas with Ergogenic, sort of, has sort of gravitated into this podcast. And we've started this from the beginning on a really cool place of, it's a passion project. People who just love supplements tend to just be gravitating towards it. But I agree, man. I personally think there should be there's a very low barrier of entry, and that's where you see those real potato formulas that come out that are just completely, it'll just be a sprinkling of buzzword ingredient here and there. Things aren't really well thought out. Just a bucket of stims with no catcher's mitt, or, like you said, it's like they've just gone through and Googled top 10 of a given ingredient in that space.
See, the frustrating thing for me is, though, that the best formulas tend not to be the most successful. The best formulas tend to be made by better marketing companies. So the best marketing company wins, not the best product. And that is frustrating as hell for me, is that there's some really, really great formulators out there, and they're not being hired by the big marketing companies because the big marketing companies don't need to hire them. They're just I don't know who's formulating some of these things, but then you see them in every second supplement store. It's the next big product. And you're like, why is this product in every supplement store and this guy's product over here that is infinitely better is not being picked up? And it's because the market is not driven by the best formula. The market is driven by marketing, and the consumer doesn't know the difference. And that's frustrating for me. I don't know if there's a way around that. Lucas, what's your take on that?
Something that came to my mind as you were mentioning that in terms of marketing aspect, dude, we can use that to our advantage. So because we know what we're doing, we know how to formulate, because we do the research, we spend the time. But if there are crappy products that have amazing marketing and they've used certain ingredients that are in the spotlight, for example, then why not structure our marketing around this outperforms this? You know what I mean? Because they're using that ingredient. Everyone's talking about lion's mane. Well, guess what? My compound here can also increase nerve growth factor like lion's mane. So it's I use lion's mane. That means that maybe it is good for me. You know what I mean? It's all the psychological game.
It's very tough. It's a very tough one. And I think it's something that me and Will kind of tussle with every time I tend to not release more than one product a year, maybe one every 2 years, because it takes me that long to feel like I've got it perfect. And Will, I know you're very similar. You don't just bang them out like we see some companies doing. You spend the time to try and get it right. But every time you release one, you're like, how do I show people, I can't force it down their throat. And sometimes you want to. Sometimes you want to just be able to go, just take this, stop taking that. Just give this a go. I've even said to people, if you take my product and you can honestly tell me that you prefer this one that you're already taking, I will buy you a tub of that when you finish my product, if you can honestly tell me that you preferred it, I'll buy it for you, because I'm that confident that you're not going to prefer that other product. But I don't know if there's an answer. Will?
I think what we're doing now, the education platform, I think is the long game. That it takes longer. Like, we might not have a lot of startups. We don't have the marketing budget of the bigger companies, but if you can, it does get frustrating. I'm literally doing room by room, seminar by seminar, and literally just customer by customer. It gets exhausting after years of doing it. And eventually it pays dividends, because you can't beat the formulations at the end of the day. The product quality speaks for itself eventually. The felt result it'll just trump it. They'll try it once, but you give it a marketing budget, will get someone to try something once, but to give actual perpetual results, that's when the actual product speaks for itself, and that comes back to the formulating and the educating. But where a really cool segue, I think, would be mentioning things like your dopamine, but also way back at the start of the podcast, a big facet of your background, Lucas, is also optimization in the hormonal space. And I'd love to use this as a bit of a bridge where the two meet. And this sort of ties in a neat little bow everything we've spoken on. So the mindset, the neurochemistry behind that, and the hormonal aspects, where do they meet would be a great segue. So let's, there's known pathways between them, like dopamine and prolactin and all. So I guess when you were looking, was that how you came to nootropics to start with, by the way, Lucas? Did you find hormonally the interactions were quite interesting? Because I've seen a lot of content from your page that sort of, shows the interactions, and this is where we can sort of segue into the hormonal space, if you'd like.
Yeah, it's a brilliant transition. So in terms of, my journey did start out with understanding nootropics in the brain, but then a few years down the track, I wanted to, as with most guys, they wanted to jack up and optimize their testosterone to feel, better, better in the bedroom, better confidence, better physical performance. And then I looked into a lot of the research into all right, what sort of effect do the hormones have on my brain? Because then I started to understand that it's the hormones that actually dictate the neurotransmitters. So for example, with thyroid hormones, for example, we know that those that have hypothyroidism or sluggish thyroid, they're going to struggle with motivation, drive, and focus and things like that. And if you strip it all the way back and understand, well, why? It's because it's affecting their brain. And same with testosterone and DHT, which gets bashed like crazy. And we could talk for hours about DHT being the nasty hormone, which actually protects men against prostate cancer, not causes prostate cancer.
That's going to be a good song. We're going to touch on that later, because DHT does get bashed, and particularly a lot of our circle are bodybuilders. And I guess DHT derivatives.
We don't want to go bald. That's why we bash it so much.
There we go. That was where I was going with it. Like a lot of the acne, balding, aggression. Sort of the low light reel of a lot of androgens and stuff like that are played with in bodybuilding. That's the buzzword, DHT. It gets thrown under the bus. It's the worst thing in the world, apparently aggravates prostate cancer, apparently has all these deleterious health effects. So we will pick your brain on that, because we've come a long way in understanding that. So we will pick up on the DHT part. But where you were saying, when there's a common link between hypothyroidism, high cortisol, low testosterone, high estrogen, and all of them having this causing a bit of a unfortunate chemical soup. Where's the bridges? Where are the links? What are we playing on? If we're having, say, hypothyroidism, so for the listeners, that's slow, thyroidism, so thyroid function, so slow metabolism, essentially. So if you have a slow metabolism, how does that directly lower your mood? What's the pathways that's working on, Luke?
Yeah, so when we look at thyroid function, we know that pretty much every single cell in the body has thyroid hormone receptors on there. So that in and of itself tells you the significance and importance of thyroid hormone. And if we look at the downstream effects of thyroid function, there is not a single dude that will ever have high testosterone with a shitty thyroid. It's basically impossible. So realistically, the thyroid governs everything downstream, because it's the master regulator, right? So in terms of it affecting the brain, so it's probably going to be 2-3 steps down the pathway somewhere along the line. But we know that active T3, so so for our listeners, so T4 is the inactive form and T3 is the active form. There are T2, by the way, but we'll just say that. But so in terms of T3, so we know that T3 jacks up the catecholamines. That's well known. It does affect the norepinephrine, the dopamine, the adrenaline. So, and you can see this with guys that take thyroid. I've personally never, because I've always optimized thyroid naturally, and I'm already borderline hyper, so I'm sitting on the good end anyway. So, but in terms of it optimizing the brain and affecting the brain, it's going to affect, if you look at like, even with estrogen buildup, guys that claiming they're building up too much estrogen, which again is debatable. We can talk about the benefits of estrogen for hours, and the dangers of using Armidex and all the letrozoles or whatever. But the body's ability to clear estrogen will be dependent on thyroid function, fecal movement, like just clearing the bowels every day. This I'm talking very naturopathically now, but it's important. Like it's freaking important.
I got a question relating to thyroid hormone. You're obviously familiar with thyroxine, synthetic T3. I've used it in the past. It was recommended to me by a coach. And to be honest, after that comp was the worst, rebound that I'd had after any comp that I'd ever done. And my metabolism, I feel like it took a huge hit after having used thyroxine. What I guess on a molecular level, what is taking thyroxine for somebody who doesn't have hypothyroidism doing?
Yeah. So
and why is it creating that that negative impact later on?
Yeah. So it comes back to that it's a pretty basic principle of the negative feedback loop, right? So exogenous input of a hormone is almost always going to result in a downregulation of the body's own production. That is not true for oxytocin. Oxytocin, if you take oxytocin, the body makes more oxytocin, and a few other hormones have that positive feedback loop, which is cool. But in terms of the thyroid affecting, so like taking exogenous thyroid, that's going to be substituting it's going to basically tell the body that it thinks it has enough thyroid hormone. TSH will then increase. This gets really technical in terms of TSH and T4. But basically, to put it simply, like you're going to be, giving your body the hormone that it thinks it has enough of, and then for the body's ability to restore the receptor sites and the binding affinities and things like that, it's going to be dysfunctional for probably, I don't know, how long did it take for you to recover?
Probably 6 months. See, it's probably the same. I guess it's the same principle as testosterone, right? When we see guys doing a cycle of testosterone and say for example, not using any HCG or anything to, I guess, switch back on that production of natural testosterone, we see this absolute, I guess, non-production of testosterone post-cycle, where guys are like losing all their gains and, their hormones are out of, they're just, they're not the zombies through the day, and, they've got no sex drive, and some of them, couldn't even get it up if they had, an early 90s Pamela Anderson standing in front of them, and, it's just a nightmare situation. But I guess the same is true for any exogenous hormone is what you're saying, really.
Yeah.
All of the systems
Sorry, Will, what was that one?
I was going to say all the systems are similar, and they all work in tandem. I found what's most fascinating. And especially when you throw like Lucas said before, so if you have high testosterone, it's very rare to have hypothyroidism, and the link being testosterone is something like 7 to 10 times more effective at the conversion of T4 to T3 at the liver site, for example, than estrogen. So when you've got an abundance of testosterone, you've got an abundance of T4, the inactive, being converted to the active form of thyroid hormone. Inversely, low testosterone, i.e. in a PCT environment, and this is something that probably super relevant, to be honest. Probably this is like a really good life hack for people, because a lot of bodybuilders obviously go through this every 12 to 16 weeks. They're going through a very, what we call hypergonadal, incredibly low testosterone environment. And that's an area that, Lucas, you've put a lot of focus on in your socials lately and what you're promoting with. And I think if there was, a podcast which had a listener base who could benefit from this a lot, it would be the Wot Supp podcast. So I guess looking at that environment, we've got a really, unfortunately, after a comp prep, you've got a terrible environment. Natty or not, you've got low test, low thyroid, regardless whether you're enhanced or otherwise. especially if you're running T3 and exogenous hormones on both fronts. So I guess what are some of the common things that are the most beneficial quick helpers when we first start, when we're in that environment? First things, because there's a lot of old myth around this stuff because there's not a lot of human data on what's best to do in the PCT period. So Lucas, what would you recommend for guys who are fresh off a cycle, who have got basically zero test and are just in a pretty bad spot? What are your quick hits? What are your first go-tos to help get that hypergonadal problem sort of back into rebound?
Yeah, so I had a feeling this would come up, and it's now my chance to talk about probably the biggest game changer for natty guys wanting to optimize testosterone. And honestly, it's going to sound crazy, but it's icing the balls. Like icing the balls.
You're right.
Ice the balls, baby. Ice the balls.
I mean, like I remember when I started, it was probably 2 years ago. I looked up, I found like some old, this is bro science to the max. I found a thread many years back, and I was looking up like how that could work. And then I found some research papers on PubMed about like how nocturnal scrotal cooling can improve fertility. And I was like, ooh, this could be a cool experiment. What's it going to cost me? $0. All right, so let's give it a try. So then I just started like 10 to 15 minutes before the gym, like on my way to the gym, slap an ice pack down there.
Are you still doing this to this day, Lucas? Are you still icing the balls?
Yeah, of course.
I don't know if I could handle it, but I might have to give it a crack. I mean, I'm right into using, I guess, extreme temperature changes to induce a response from the body. In the anti-aging space, it's huge, right? We look at cold water immersion and this sort of thing, and its ability to increase NAD production and all sorts of other things, reduce mTOR factor and so on and so forth. Really, really interesting. And I think that I wouldn't be surprised if after this podcast we see ice. Ice is in the kind that you get from the petrol station, not the kind that you buy from the guy in the corner. Ice sales go up dramatically for icing the balls.
Yeah.
There we go. Are you going to give that one a crack, Will?
What's the pathway there? Because before I go buy some frozen peas, I want to know why I'm buying them. That $1.99 could be better spent. So what's the pathway there? Is it similar to, and I wonder if this has something to do with why ice baths are so profoundly good on other areas. So Dr. Ben Greenfield, for example, had a really cool segment on BPAC's podcast the other week where he was talking about ice bath immersion being, it promoted a 24-hour lowering of blood sugar for an entire day below postprandial, like either pre or postprandial as well. So with or without food, blood glucose was significantly lower the whole time. So maybe it has good effects on a lot of other pathways, this, ice baths and so on. So where's the link with testosterone in particular, mate? Where's the positives in the cooling?
Yeah, so I know it sounds weird, but it does come back to the fact that guys, just in general, even literally right now, there we go.
Is that a must, Jeff Neal? You have no shame. You're going to stop it. Oh, this is beautiful. Go to the academics.
For those of you who did, if I wasn't on camera just then, I've just gone and grabbed one of my meals out of the freezer. I'm just defrosting it at the moment.
Yeah, you're a Samaritan. So Lucas, why is this helping Stu right now?
Yeah, so if you look at the actual mechanism of action, so if you look at basically just guys in general, like even wearing underwear and like working at a desk or moving around, whatever, driving in the car, your testicles are literally they're 2 degrees too warm. It just takes a marginal 2 degrees too warm to completely arrest spermatogenesis. So you're not even able to create sperm when your testicles are 2 degrees too warm. So that's that's why they're outside the body, obviously, like that's why they're situated outside the body. So in terms of why icing is so beneficial is because now guys are experiencing what it's like having another one.
So what you're doing is basically overriding that process and going, okay, let's drop temperature to a more of an optimal zone for spermagenesis and that sort. Okay. So is that is that Leydig cell pathway, or is that follicle stimulating, luteinizing? Like, what's happening there?
Yeah. So part of the other mechanism would be, so with the so cold equals vasoconstriction, and then you're probably going to get a subsequent rebound in vasodilation. So part of that rebound vasodilation, my theory is that you're going to be driving more blood flow, oxygen, nutrients to the Leydig cells, supporting ATP production, therefore improving luteinizing hormone signaling. So just in general, guys, like, I'm not even joking. I created a whole Facebook group, which we can link to your listeners, but it was first called Sub-Zero. I've changed the name. But basically, like, every single guy every single dude that's joined that group has reported benefits from icing. Like, legitimately, it's been a game changer for a lot of guys, just in general.
It stands to reason, though, right? Like, if you even look at the evolution of the male reproductive system, we look at how it's set up, and it's set up to be hanging beneath our body mass in order to cool. Now, if we've evolved this evolutionary trait, in a need for survival, it stands to reason that we should be working to keep them as cool as we can, right? We've evolved to try and keep them cooler, so we shouldn't be boxing them up in something that heats up that situation down there, so to speak.
What I found phenomenal, and I really want to make this segment big, because I think people who focus on male optimization, particularly in this space, it's a non-event, right? And it's got this massive stigma around it because inevitably you end up discussing as well, exogenous testosterone use or HRT, and in Australia that just gets bashed as being criminal, right? But with I guess guys, we tend to get overlooked a lot of the times, I think, and it's because a lot of our we're not as outspoken about it. A lot of the time it's got a bit of a stigma or embarrassment around it as well, having lower testosterone. But when they look at studies from, the average testosterone levels now, are something like, a third of what they were 100 years ago. And I contribute that to a lot of chronically elevated stress, like cortisol being a massive contributor to that. I put a paper up on my story the other week with circulating cortisol lowering free testosterone massively. And even when you look at the blood results that Lucas shared with me last night for a bit of an experiment, he has absolutely phenomenal free test levels at 34. And the range used to be, even 2 years ago, when I had my last round of bloods, it was between, I think it was between 8 and 31 was the range. And now, sort of what they consider normal for your free testosterone. So you have total, and then about 2% of your total testosterone is free testosterone. And that range used to be 8 to 31. Now, when I look at your paper there yesterday, it had 5 to 26. So they've already shifted it down, 20 odd % for what's considered low. Now, if your free testosterone is 5, that's essentially a PCT environment. You are depressed. You're feeling horrific. You're not going to want to get out of bed. You have no libido, no mood, no motivation, no muscle mass is going to be near impossible to build. Recovery is going to be through the floor, holding stubborn body fat everywhere. You're just going to feel horrific. Like it's going to be like you're PMSing 24/7, but no one talks about it. Yeah. So I guess apart from the icing as well, steps to optimizing the male experience and getting up towards your levels are absolutely huge, Lucas. Your free and total is right off the charts as far as what they're looking at now. So what was your pathway to get there? What was some of the, icing was obviously one key point. What are some of the other things you can share with our listeners that helps you get, help you along the way?
Yeah, of course. So we'll actually go through some of the key things, because I actually built like a course for dudes to to optimize testosterone. So like there's a free one, which we can link for your listeners to go through. And then there's like an advanced course, which is like a 3-hour long, basically channeling everything that I've learned and then applied personally to jack up my testosterone. But there would have been, we'll start with like a few key things, obviously like icing the balls. And in terms of like diet intake, like nutrient therapies, like I was eating a lot of organ meats at that time. Like I was eating plenty of chicken hearts, like liver, like twice a week, kidneys. I was eating kidneys. Obviously all cooked, not raw. It's just ridiculously disgusting.
I'm just picturing Lucas there, like at this almost like Hannibal looking banquet, and he's got I enjoyed its liver with a nice bottle of Chianti.
Good on him. They are phenomenally helpful, actually. One I think it was Paul Saladino was quite big in this space, and looking at organ meats and what they can do for. I think when the carnivore diet came out, I think a lot of the health benefits people were touting was actually the fact that when people started to eat nose to tail and were eating these organ meats and the nutrient density, like there's the same amount of vitamin C in 100 grams of liver as there is in a full orange. But we ask people vitamin C source, it's only citrus. Well, 100 grams of liver, tiny amount, is the same as a full orange in vitamin C, along with, it's the reason the Inuits didn't get scurvy and they lived on a meat-only diet. They ate nose to tail as well, and they got all their nutrients from, because they're the storage sites a lot of the time for these fat and water-soluble vitamins, the liver and kidneys. So that's a really good hint. That's a really good hack, mate. What sort of quantities, though? So practical take-homes, for our listeners, we're saying twice a week. We're talking 100 grams, just at, or are we talking quite a significant amount, to have it as a supplement per se?
Yeah, with the chicken hearts at around that time, I was probably having around like 200 grams at least 3 times a week. It was quite a lot.
That is,
it's if you think about how much cholesterol, that's way more cholesterol than you get in eggs, like way more. And by the way, in terms of cholesterol, you can actually now supplement. Have you guys seen that you can supplement with cholesterol?
No, cool.
No, I haven't seen. Oh, that's news to me.
You can literally supplement with cholesterol because 10% of that will contribute to the end result, like the end downstream hormones.
Yeah. That's awesome. And that's actually, could you, because I know this is really basic stuff for you, Lucas, but for a lot of our listeners, right, cholesterol gets bashed, right? Like when I started speaking to, say, people in my parents' generation, recently, just getting them to use it, my natural testosterone supplement was really quite hard. They look at things like, oh no, I'm trying to lower my cholesterol right now. I don't want to take anything, and they're worried about optimizing tests being bad for cholesterol and all this. There's a lot of misnomer around cholesterol, right, and what it actually does. But could you run through the listeners how actually crucial that is as our precursor, how that actually works? Because that's just something that I think the whole of society, we can safely say, doesn't understand. So what does cholesterol do? How is that in our conversation with testosterone linked?
Yeah, the reason why we're talking about cholesterol is because it really is that foundational building block to create all of the hormones downstream, not just testosterone, but from that cholesterol, the body then creates pregnenolone, then progesterone. By the way, those two hormones are very anti-stress and pro-health. They're very pro-metabolic, they're pro-health, they're anti-stress. And so with cholesterol, we know that that's only found in animal-based products. So like heavily, saturated fat, very heavy fat meats, things like that. Even chicken contains a small amount as well. But in terms of it being important, I mean, in terms of the brain, like we go back to the brain and understanding what the brain is made of, like majority of it is fat. And so to help with that, signaling pathways, neuronal signaling and plasticity and things like that is heavily reliant upon cholesterol. And in fact, now we can see the full picture. Those that have hypothyroidism are the ones that have high cholesterol. You can read someone's blood test, have a look at their TSH, and you can almost always predict their cholesterol based on their TSH and this is really cool. In fact, have you heard of androstenedione?
No.
Oh, yeah, that's the other name for aromatase, isn't it? Is that the 17.5 estradiol that's in quite often they use as a bit of a mild aromatase inhibitor?
Yeah, there is that one, but there's another one that's heavily rich. Sorry, it's androsterone, which is found in celery. You've probably heard of celery containing pheromones, like prohormones.
Mm-hmm.
But that can be a thyroid mimetic when you use in high doses. It can really jack up metabolism and things like that. But the reason why I'm talking about that is because if you ramp up that the thyroid side of things, you're going to naturally keep cholesterol in range. Like if you've got a healthy thyroid, you don't need to be worrying about how much cholesterol you're consuming. And plus, it's the biggest myth ever that your lifespan will be shorter if you have zero cholesterol. It's a well-known scientific fact that cholesterol is so important for longevity.
And I think for some of our vegan listeners and heavily and even vegetarian listeners as well, I think saying that a lot of the cholesterols are animal products typically. So would you actually recommend sort of supplementing with, if you can now source a straight cholesterol supplement, or anything you'd sort of suggest for our vegan listeners? Because obviously it'd be great from a micronutrient perspective, but probably there, from a hormonal profile, I've seen similarly to, that can be quite disastrous. So what would you recommend for, say our vegan listeners that are wanting to optimize testosterone still, that might be suffering from lower cholesterol because they're just not getting that animal-based saturated fat profile they might be after?
Yeah, I mean, it's quite experimental. I don't really see many people using exogenous cholesterol. It's leave that for the biohackers, just the weirdos like us.
Yep. Proud to be part of the team.
Yeah, but just in general, like they can get away with using products like yours, with natural testosterone boosters and supporting all of the cofactors and some of the key nutrients and fertility enhancing compounds. But it comes back to if they're going to adhere to a vegan diet, they can do it, but it's freaking hard, and they need to be keeping close eye on their blood tests and their biomarkers and things like that, because it can be difficult, as we know. Like you've seen Mike Tyson's now switched back out of the vegan diet, is now eating meat again. Like this, it just happens.
I think as have probably, I think there's definitely a moral standpoint to be made for veganism, which I am in total support of. I've got a lot of good customers who are vegan. Some people, everyone's got their own reasons for doing things, but as you said, after the documentary What the Health came out, we saw the fad vegans come out. And the fad vegans, I think probably 80% of those have dropped off now, which is interesting. I wanted to circle back just quickly, Lucas. We won't keep you for too much longer, but I wanted to circle back on something that you mentioned, because as a bodybuilder and as someone who deals with bodybuilders a lot, it was a really interesting point that you brought up, was the importance of estrogen. Now, for me, anecdotally, I've found that I never use aromatase inhibitors. If I've ever used exogenous testosterone, I've never used aromatase inhibitors. I don't seem to need to. I don't have negative side effects that some of the other guys see, but I know guys who, just as a precautionary measure, they will take things like Arimidex at half a gram every second day for an entire cycle, but they don't seem to see the same sort of growth as the guys who kind of leave the estrogen alone. What's the story there? Can you give us the full picture?
Yeah. So in terms of estrogen's ability to support muscle growth, that's related to its effects on, I think it's satellite cell signaling. It plays a key role in actually promoting that sort of proliferation of muscle cells. So, and the other interesting bit is that the guys that do decide to crash their estrogen or keep it really low, they're going to see issues with abdominal fat. Like in terms of, there is research showing that those that have healthy estrogen have lower body fat, like lower abdominal fat. So estrogen does play a role in fat burning somehow. I think it may be through affecting uncoupling proteins, so a few of the enzymes responsible for creating heat. But the other thing is, from a well-being perspective, there are studies in male rats where they literally inject these male rats with estradiol, and they just become more horny. They just become to me, that's right. Okay. So clearly estradiol is not a female hormone. It is not a female hormone. It is it's important. It can be we can't say that we need a modulator. It cannot be super high, because then you're going to run into issues.
I suppose at either end of the spectrum on extremes, you're going to run into problems, right? Whether you have zero estrogen or estrogen that's 200 times the normal amount, you're going to run into problems. What we're looking for is an ideal range, and that exists in men as well. I think the common belief in bodybuilders is that I wish I had no estrogen. I wish my body didn't produce this unnecessary hormone that is a girly hormone and it makes part of me girly, and I got to get rid of that. That's kind of the approach that a lot of bodybuilders will take towards estrogen. Get rid of it at all costs, right?
Oh, definitely. And I think people on HRT as well. So not just bodybuilders running high doses of exogenous testosterone, but I think there's also a lot of talks around men who have either used PEDs in the past and now their natural testosterone system isn't that trash hot, or even people as they age and testosterone naturally declines are now looking at testosterone replacement therapy. So being on exogenous testosterone at a dose close to what their body would otherwise produce. And they don't ever get prescribed typically any estrogens as well. But that's an interesting space too. Some people do feel the need to. So in your opinion, Lucas, do you find that when playing with exogenous testosterone, is it really important to even look at aromatase that like literally limiting the conversion? Or do you think if everything's look at the pathways, make sure everything's going in the correct pathways, DHTs, 5-alpha reductase, all that cool stuff? Like how do you approach this and for optimal health for men?
Yeah, so it comes back to obviously it's individual. So it's based on a guy's SHBG and DHT. It's like an orchestra. Like with all hormones, it's important to have all of them in balance, even cortisol as well, which also gets bashed a lot. But in terms of so the estrogen, yeah. So in terms of it my stance on this is, we want to modulate estrogen, and we do this through very mild aromatase inhibiting compounds, such as I'm a huge fan of, and I was using nettle root. I was using some of the other herbal aromatase inhibitors. I was having quite a lot of white button mushrooms, which are really potent anti-estrogen. I was having a lot of basically resorting to natural aromatase inhibitors instead of using letrozole and some of the really hardcore, heavy-hitting pharmaceutical grade aromatase inhibitors.
White buttons.
Yeah, well, that natural estrogen inhibition, or I guess a better way to put it is estrogen modulation space, is one that is really getting a lot more attention now. I have a estrogen modulating product that I developed in late 2015, early 2016, called Estradiol, which is it contains some of these compounds that you're mentioning, and just recently we've seen a lot of the big companies in Australia starting to do the same thing. I know you've been working on one for quite some time as well, Will.
Yeah, I've been playing with that space, and I think the conclusion I came to was it was not limiting, but basically supporting detoxification was how I thought was really the main way to get everything else in check. When you've got so when I started formulating that, the initial paperwork is you'd say a lot of people wanted to lower estrogen. That was the initial thing when they're taking this sort of product. A lot of women with estrogen dominance as well, endometriosis, or on the other end of the spectrum, PCOS. And I thought it was so hard because everyone's on contraception now as well. So you've got exogenous hormones, and a lot of women don't realize that that's very similar concept to guys running exogenous hormones. Like you'd almost call a pill a steroid in the way that it manipulates hormones, But I found that the most, at the end of the day, it's trawling through all the textbooks was the only thing I could do was basically make a detoxification support product. All of your cofactors for methylation, sulfation, conjugation, those things were what I was looking at. Curcumin, but getting inflammation down, getting cortisol down. Like you said, everything works in harmony, right? Get everything playing together. And looking into that supplemental space, we've looked at the estrogen modulation space. You've got your DIMs and sulforaphanes. You've got a lot of your brassica species as well are very handy. For our listeners who are focusing on this part of the segment where it's testosterone based, guys, supplemental hacks for men to support testosterone, because this is an area I know the Gorilla, going back to a few episodes, has put out a fair bit of content on. What's your stance on supplements that genuinely support testosterone production?
Yes, you're looking at someone who's pretty much tried every single natural testosterone boosting herb or product on the market, and it even goes back like probably 2-3 years ago. I was looking into various Ayurvedic compounds, so like Indian medicine, and even like things from Thailand and things like that. Some of the ginger varieties, but I mean, where do we start? So let's go with like the common herbs that guys can use. So like ginger. So hefty doses of ginger can increase luteinizing hormone, directly supports testosterone production. It can improve sperm count, sperm motility, and other fertility markers. Then you've got compounds like Shilajit, which I was using for at least a year straight, which is, there's a research paper on it affecting follicle stimulating hormone, luteinizing hormone. And then actually I was running royal jelly for some time, which has been shown to drive the conversion of DHEA to testosterone in healthy men, which was quite good. But there's just so many unique, and Tonkat Ali was like a winner. Obviously, that was like
For me, that Tonkat Ali, the Neurocram longifolia, as it's botanically known, is my top go-to testosterone booster at the moment. Like I'm naming way too many products of my own this session, but I do one anyway that contains that. But I found that there's like been this real drive towards using a lot of laxagenin and ectosterone, which anecdotally for me, I didn't see the effects from. So I intentionally left those out of my product, and I leant towards your Tonkat Ali, and I actually rewound right back to some compounds that have essentially been disproven for testosterone boosting, purely because for me, I get better results out of them. I've included, I guess, almost for what would you call it? Just out of superstition's sake, put some D-aspartic acid and Bulgarian tribulus in my product as well. And a lot of people want to say, but look at this study and look at that study and that sort of thing. But for me, I see better results on that than I do from laxagenin, say, for example. Obviously, I included ZMA in there as well, your zinc, magnesium, B6. But I tend to start with the papers. I want my product to match what the data says, and then if it's not working, sometimes I have to rewind back to what's going on. The other thing to remember is that there's only so many studies on these things, and we're doing new studies on different compounds every day. Some of these things that have been left behind and supposedly disproven, you see 2 or 3 years later, a paper comes out that says, well, hang on, hey, wait a minute, what we thought about this compound, we've now re-looked into it and it's doing this or it's doing that. So for me, I always have to come back to what is giving me the best result, and that product is my second best selling product because it's one of the testosterone boosters on the market that people see definitive results when they use it. You're spending $80 on the product. You're seeing, you can trackably see your power increasing and your lean muscle mass increasing. And to me, that's what's important when we're looking at a testosterone booster. That's what we're trying to do.
What's interesting is I think as well, the data, we have to be careful on. A lot of it's for hypergonadal environments too, which is really interesting. So and I've had people who are just finished PCTs do bloods for me on mine because I wanted to see, and the effects were profoundly exaggerated compared to using it when you're close to optimal. As well in a lot of cases. D-aspartic acid though, that'd be a really good one. And again, we won't keep it for too much longer, Lucas, because we are getting a bit on the long side. But we'll definitely have you back for a part 2 because there's still so much to look into. D-aspartic acid, it gets bashed, and it had some really great promising data. I think the numbers were a 40% increase in total testosterone when it was used at like a 3.1 gram dosage, was the buzz number back in the day. So what's your stance on D-aspartic acid and indeed tribulus, actually? Because they're two classics that used to be so big that then all of a sudden sort of fell out of favor. So what's your sort of go-tos for those? Like what's the data say on those compounds?
Yeah, so when Stu mentioned that he felt better on D-aspartic acid and tribulus, I think he said. Well, if we look at, and this is what I've always been, like I've now started to hone in on, is when we subjectively say we feel better on, let's say, a testosterone booster like D-aspartic acid, that feeling component and like subjectively noticing the effects is actually mediated via the brain. Like even though it may not show up in the bloods that your testosterone hasn't budged, it's acting on the brain. It's acting on those NMDA receptors and creating a stimulatory excitatory response. So you're going to get that subjective feeling of, oh, I feel it. You know what I mean? But really, in terms of it affecting blood testosterone, it may take 6 to 8 weeks to notice the effect. But the guys want to feel it. They want to, and I understand, because I'm the same as you used to. Like, I want to feel it. But let's say something that's working very easy, like, for example, let's talk about pregnenolone. When I ran pregnenolone, I didn't necessarily feel it, but I'm pretty damn sure that did raise my testosterone based on other biomarkers and other metrics. But yeah, no, you definitely, in terms of, there's a trade-off obviously between
felt effect
data.
Yeah. Okay. No, very, very interesting. And that's very, we always come back to that, don't we, Stu? Every episode we'll talk about pre-workouts, nootropics, test boosts. We'll talk about multiple different areas, and it always comes back to, then every now and then something comes along without the best paperwork and it blows you away. Happened to me with a non-stimulant based nootropic actually this week, funnily enough. And it was on paper, just rubbish. You're like, why are you bothering? It was like 100 megs of alpha GPC. Everything was just, doses were just tragically low, right? Like tyrosine was like 200 milligrams. And you're like, why bother? But, together, felt effects were phenomenal. I was like, wow, didn't see that coming. Really quite drastically good product. So sometimes that felt effect is, particularly in the hormonal space, what a lot of people are looking for, particularly when the neurochemistry doesn't support the mood, either to have it otherwise. Low testosterone guys are reaching for a test boost because they've probably got low testosterone, or they're feeling like they've got low. Mood's probably low. If a bit of positive mood probably goes a long way. So, but yeah, look, I think without further ado, guys, I think that was a phenomenal bit of content. Wow, we covered a lot of really, really good chemistry today. I'm absolutely stoked that we managed to pick your brain on such a broad area. I think it's probably one of our best ones, Stu, in terms of getting across, hormones, thyroid, estrogen, testosterone, nootropics.
100%. Yeah, really good fun episode. Thanks so much for coming on, Lucas. It was absolutely awesome to pick your brain. And as we say to a lot of the guests that we really enjoy chatting to, we're definitely going to have to get you on in the future for at least an episode 2, if not an episode 3, 4, and 5. So thanks for coming on, Lucas. It was really, really great having a chat with you.
Yeah, no, thanks for having me on, guys. When I first started watching the episode, like I think it was the very first episode, I just said to myself, I'm going to feature on this one. I can't wait to be on this one. Like, because I just resonated with you guys, and a lot of the things you were saying, I'm like, gosh, you sound like me in so many ways. I was like, yeah, these guys are awesome. But nah, it's been a pleasure. It's been an honor. It's a good start to the week. It's Monday morning and I'm buzzing. I just can't wait to keep researching and developing amazing content. So thanks, guys. Yeah.
Phenomenal, mate. Thank you very much. All right, guys, thank you for listening again to Wot Supp podcast. Wrap it up there. Thanks again, Lucas. Cheers for listening, guys. See you later.
Thank you.